Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. It was a quiet spring morning in Idyllwild, California, April 7th, 2017, when 25-year-old David O'Sullivan put on his backpack, stepped onto the Pacific Crest Trail, and vanished. The Irish hiker had come to America chasing a dream, to walk from Mexico to Canada alone through some of the country's wildest landscapes. The day before, he'd sent a brief email from the town's small library, his last known communication. Since then, there's been nothing. No calls, no confirmed sightings, no trace of him. How does someone disappear on one of the most traveled trails in the U.S.? What happened to David Sullivan, and where is he now? There's something almost mythic about the Pacific Crest Trail, a ribbon of wilderness stretching over 2,650 miles from the U.S. border with Mexico all the way to Canada. The PCT snakes through some of the most breathtaking and unforgiving landscapes in North America. It cuts through 3 states, California, Oregon, and Washington, and passes through 25 national forests and 7 national parks. From the scorching deserts of Southern California to the snowy peaks of the Sierra Nevadas and the lush emerald forests of the Pacific Northwest, the PCT is more than just a trail. It's a journey, an odyssey. It was first proposed in the 1930s by Clinton C. Clark, who imagined a trail that would rival the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast. But it wasn't until 1993 that the PCT was officially declared finished and recognized as one of the country's 11 national scenic trails. Each year, thousands of hikers attempt a through hike, a journey from one end of the trail to the other. Some do it for the physical challenge, some are chasing a sense of freedom or transformation, and others are looking for healing, for answers, or maybe just for silence. But the PCT demands respect. It's beautiful, yes, but also wild and unpredictable. Hikers face exposure, sudden snowstorms, dehydration, wildlife encounters, and stretches where no human soul has seen for days. There are long desert crossings, perilous river fords, steep switchbacks over ice and rock, and moments of isolation that can feel endless. Now, I've always been fascinated by the PCT. Something about its combination of majesty and menace. But this case, the case of David O'Sullivan, didn't come to me because I was researching trail stories or survival tales. It found me. A few weeks ago, I took a weekend road trip to the mountain town of Idyllwild, just a couple hours outside of Los Angeles. My best friend came with me, along with my boyfriend, 3 dogs, and my baby mini pig. It was a perfect escape. A break from the city, from the noise, and from the day-to-day heaviness of true crime cases. The first morning in Idyllwild, we went for a hike up Devil's Slide, a steep, winding trail that leads you up in the San Jacinto Mountains. On the way up, we passed a solo hiker making his way north along the PCT. He stopped to chat with us, full of enthusiasm about the miles ahead. Something about that brief conversation stuck with me. It was a reminder how open the trail is, how full of promise, and how fragile that promise can be. Later that day, we wandered into a cozy little coffee shop in town, and that's when I saw it. David O'Sullivan's missing person flyer. It was posted near the entrance, weathered from time and still there 8 years later. The date stopped me cold. It was April 7th, the same day David disappeared in 2017. I don't know if you believe in signs, but I do. And this one felt too pointed, too eerie to ignore. I went home and immediately started digging into David's story. A young Irish hiker, friendly and enthusiastic, who vanished not far from where I had just stood on the same trail. A hiker who disappeared without a trace in the same wilderness where I had just spent a sunny afternoon laughing with friends, petting dogs, and sipping iced coffee. So, let's talk about Idyllwild. Nestled in the San Jacinto Mountains, Idyllwild is one of those towns that feels both timeless and slightly enchanted. Once a logging village, then an artist retreat, it's now known for its indie shops, pine-scented trails, and a quirky community that loves its small-town charm. There are no chain stores here, no fast food, just art galleries, local diners, and trails that lead into mythic places. Hikers come through Idyllwild on their way north along the PCT, taking a breather before climbing up into the high country. But even in a place as idyllic as Idyllwild, the wilderness is never far away. The Devil's Slide Trail, where we met that solo hiker, climbs quickly in steep terrain. And just beyond it lies Fuller Ridge, one of the most treacherous parts of the PCT in early spring. Legends swirl around these mountains, too. Stories of lost gold mines, ghost sightings, and of course, the ever-present tension between nature's beauty and its danger. And maybe that's what makes David's story so haunting. He was just a few days into the adventure of a lifetime when somewhere in these vast, quiet hills, he vanished. The line between serenity and peril is razor thin out there. So when I saw that flyer at the cafe, it wasn't just a missing persons notice. It was an echo, a whisper from the trail, a story waiting to be told. And now you're here. So let's talk about David O'Sullivan. Let's talk about what happened and what might have happened. Let's honor his story, and let's start at the beginning.
Hi there, we're Lauren
and Kenzie,
the co-hosts of A Scary State podcast.
Each week we cover a different state in the U.S. and we cover anything from murder mysteries,
Strange disappearances,
paranormal activity,
cryptids,
or urban legends.
So if you're interested in learning about the spooky things in your state, give us a listen.
New episodes come out every Wednesday and you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts.
Stay scary.
Stay safe.
David O'Sullivan was born on August 29, 1991, in Cork, Ireland. The younger of two boys, he grew up in a home where love was abundant and family was everything. His older brother Niall was 4 years his senior, and together they were cherished by their parents Con and Carmel O'Sullivan. David and Niall were also lucky enough to have a large extended family. Their grandparents, aunts, and uncles played an active role in their lives, showering them with attention, support, and warmth throughout their childhood. It was a close, affectionate upbringing that helped shape David into the kind, thoughtful, and loyal person he became. From a young age, David was full of fun and full of heart. He had a joyful spirit, a contagious laugh, and a natural talent for making people smile. He attended Saline National School, where his creativity and love for performing became quickly apparent. He took to the stage in school plays and amateur drama productions, often bringing the house down with his comedic timing and magnetic presence. His performances were a reflection of who he was, smart, engaging, and endlessly entertaining. When David moved on to Christian Brothers School for secondary education, his talent for entertaining continued to shine. Every year, he was the highlight of the school's Christmas party, performing stand-up comedy routines that left both students and teachers in stitches. His love for laughter was matched by a deep generosity. He often took the stage at local charity events, using his voice and charm to raise money for good causes. One particularly memorable moment was when he shaved his head to raise funds for Marymount Hospice, a local facility close to the hearts of many in Cork. It was a small act that spoke volumes about David's character. He cared, and when he cared, he showed up. David was also a gifted student, excelling in subjects that required both analytical thinking and creative expression. He particularly thrived in English and geography. Drawn to storytelling, ideas, and the wider world beyond Ireland's borders. After secondary school, he pursued a one-year degree course in media studies, where he found another outlet for his creativity and curiosity. His passion for communication and storytelling led him to University College Cork, where he studied English and philosophy and earned an honors degree. During his time at UCC, David hosted a weekly radio show, a space where he explored topics that mattered to him and shared his thoughts in his own engaging style. He loved the medium and often talked about pursuing a career in broadcasting, but he also believed in gaining real-life experience first. He wanted to see the world, understand it, and live in it more deeply before settling into a career. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted to do things with meaning. Outside of school and academics, David was a man of many interests. He was an avid reader, and his bedroom was filled with books, everything from novels and biographies to political theory and travel writing. He never came back from town without a new book under his arm, and his reading interests were as wide-ranging as they were deep. He could talk for hours about his latest favorite author, and he loved a good conversation about philosophy, politics, or pop culture just as much as a debate over the rules of a board game. David was also physically active. His hobbies included cycling, running, hiking, drama, horseback riding, and films. As a younger boy, he took karate and developed discipline and focus, earning a black belt by the age of 16. In his late teens, he became increasingly interested in politics, and he followed local and international affairs with a curious and informed perspective. Whether it was a heated debate or a relaxed chat with friends, David brought insight, respect, and humor to every discussion. He had a loyal heart, a trait that defined his relationships with family, friends, and even employers. During university, he took a weekend job at a local garage, and after finishing college, he chose to stay on full-time. The goal was simple but meaningful: to save money for a car, and more importantly, to travel. He was diligent and responsible, but always driven by a larger sense of purpose. Adventure wasn't just a dream for David, it was a plan. Over the years, David traveled widely. He went on family holidays to England, Scotland, Portugal, the Canary Islands, Tunisia, and New York. Later, as an adult, he made more personal trips, visiting his brother Niall in South Korea and his cousin Jeremy in Thailand. He also shared unforgettable travel experiences with his dad, visiting Washington, London, and Scottish Highlands. These trips weren't just vacations. They were windows into the world. Every new destination only deepened his desire to explore further. Sometime in the years before 2017, David read Cheryl Strayed's memoir, Wild, a story of grief, healing, and solitude on the Pacific Crest Trail, and it stuck with him. Inspired, David began researching the trail, an epic journey stretching from the border of Mexico all the way to Canada. The idea of taking it on himself began as a seed, but quickly grew into a clear and focused goal. In 2016, he made it official. He would attempt the PCT the next year. He spent months preparing, training on local trails, studying the terrain, buying gear, and saving every penny from his job. But there was only so much he could do in Ireland. The mountains there reach heights of about 3,000 feet, a far cry from the snow-covered peaks of the Sierra Nevada and the rugged elevation of Southern California. Snow and ice were rare in Ireland, and he wouldn't have had access to tools like crampons or an ice axe, which is gear used to prevent or stop a fall on frozen slopes. Still, David did everything he could to be ready. He approached the challenge with the same spirit he brought to everything else in life: optimistic, informed, and determined. When he told his parents about his plans, they were surprised and understandably nervous, but they also knew their son. He was thoughtful and capable. He had done his research and was chasing something he believed in. In March 2017, David flew to the United States to begin the Pacific Crest Trail. It was an adventure he had dreamed of, and he set off full of energy, curiosity, and hope. At 25 years old, David was doing exactly what he wanted, exploring the world with a mind wide open and a heart full of promise. David's journey on the Pacific Crest Trail began like so many others, with a sense of wonder, preparation, and quiet determination. For weeks, he followed the path he'd dreamed about, covering miles of wilderness step by step. But then, Without warning, the updates stopped. No more messages, no more sightings, just silence. Somewhere out there among the trees and ridgelines, David disappeared. What happened in those weeks on the trail? What was he doing before he vanished? What was seen and what was missed? Let's get into the timeline of David's last trip. In 2017, David O'Sullivan was one of nearly 4,000 hikers granted permits to attempt the Pacific Crest Trail. The PCT is often described as one of the most beautiful and most brutal long-distance hiking trails in the world. It's not just a physical feat, it's a mental crucible. For many, it's a deeply personal journey, a modern-day pilgrimage. And for David, the quiet, curious 25-year-old from Ireland, it represented something more. A personal challenge, a life chapter, and maybe even a turning point. He'd been dreaming of this hike for years, reading blog posts, watching videos, saving up while working at a gas station, planning meticulously. The idea had taken root and refused to let go. He wasn't an adrenaline junkie or a survivalist. He was thoughtful and a little reserved. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was deliberate, a goal, a dream. But here's something most people don't realize about the PCT. Even though the permits are issued by the Pacific Crest Trail Association, a nonprofit that helps maintain and protect the trail, they don't actually track hikers' movements. There's no central GPS system, no mandatory check-ins, no trail-wide safety net. Once you're on the trail, you're on your own. The PCTA will give you a permit and a recommended start date, but after that, it's up to you. And that freedom is both the beauty and the danger of the trail. And David's designated start date was March 22nd, 2017. And that's earlier than most want to start. Most northbound thru hikers prefer mid to late April or even early May, waiting for snow to melt in the Sierra Nevada and the heat to subside in the desert. But David was eager, he was ready, and more than anything, he was determined. He flew into Southern California and made his way to Campo, the dusty little town at the edge of the US-Mexico border. This was mile marker 0, the beginning of the PCT. From here, the trail cuts north to the Anza Borrego Desert and into the mountains beyond. And this could be where things already started to feel off. David sent an email to his father after arriving in Campo. He mentioned that despite 50 hikers being scheduled to start the trail that same day, he had only seen 2. They hiked together for a quick minute, but eventually split up, and he didn't see either of them again. He wrote, "I hiked about 6 miles on the first day. I passed 2 tents. There were meant to be 50 people starting that day." The silence was eerie. Now, hikers call this phenomenon the bubble, the big wave of hikers that typically bunches up at the start and fans out as the trail progresses. But somehow, David had missed the bubble, or maybe the bubble missed him. On March 23rd, day 2 of his journey, David hiked further into the desert landscape. Rolling hills, scattered cactus, and dry riverbeds. He passed just 2 other hikers. One was a woman who was only hiking as far as Mount Laguna and didn't want to chat. The other chatted with him briefly about destinations David hadn't memorized yet. Names like Idyllwild, Julian, and Kennedy Meadows. They meant nothing to him then. He was still getting his bearings. And then, day 3, March 24th. Sand, heat, and solitude. David emailed his father again and said, "I didn't see anyone hiking on the trail. The only people I saw were a couple of hunters. One carrying beer, the other carrying a rifle. Maybe don't tell Mom that part." He was trying to keep it light, but the tone had shifted. He was alone and he knew it. That night, at a lonely desert campsite, David finally crossed paths with another thru hiker. She had already completed in 2 days what had taken him in 3. She looked at his gear, his heavy boots, his massive pack, and pointed out something critical. David had miscalculated. He'd accidentally packed his gear based on kilograms instead of pounds. Now, every ounce counts when you're hiking hundreds of miles, and David was carrying way too much weight. Still, he was in good spirits. The desert was in bloom that year. California had just emerged from a brutal drought, followed by an unusually wet winter. Wildflowers exploded across the desert floor in a rare super bloom, a once-in-a-decade spectacle of color and fragrance. David wrote, "There's been a lot of rainfall lately, and all the desert flowers are in bloom. I can smell their perfume like aroma as I hike. Most of the place is covered in green, and there were streams everywhere. It's a weird time to be in Southern California. It's not usually like this." On March 25th, David reached the small town of Mount Laguna, perched at over 6,000 feet in the mountains above San Diego County. He stopped at a well-known outfitter and did what many thru hikers do. He got a gear shakedown. He swapped out his tent, sleeping pad, and some clothing for lighter options. It was a smart move and a turning point. He was learning, adapting. From March 26th and through March 28th, David made excellent time. He hiked 35 miles over 3 days, which is no small feat, especially for a newer hiker. On March 28th, he reached Julian, a charming old mining town, famous among the PCT hikers for its generous hospitality and its apple pie. He rested there, taking a 0 day on March 29th. He emailed his dad from Julian and mentioned the local cafe that served slices of pie weighing a full pound. He joked, "I haven't tried it. I still eat normal amounts." Still, something continued to gnaw at him. Where was everyone? In his longest email so far, he reflected on his loneliness, how he still hadn't really fallen into a group. But he didn't seem worried. He seemed introspective, curious. From March 30th to April 2nd, David was back on trail and moving fast. Over the course of 4 days, he hiked more than 70 miles, his longest stretch yet. One of those days, he covered 20 miles, which is a milestone among PCT hikers known as a big day. He passed through Warner Springs and the Cleveland National Forest, winding his way into the remote and beautiful Anza Borrego Desert State Park. But the weather was turning. On March 31st, another hiker on the trail blogged about a violent storm, one so strong it bent the poles of his tent and sent rain lashing sideways through the trees. David didn't mention it, but he would have been out there too, alone. And then, April 3rd, David stopped for lunch at Paradise Valley Cafe, a legendary trail stop in the mountains outside Anza, California. There, he met a fellow thru hiker named Daniel Windsor. Daniel remembered David clearly, sunburned, quiet, with a friendly smile and an Irish accent. They chatted about gear and logistics, about how David had worked long hours at a gas station to save up for this trip. After lunch, David caught a ride back to the trail. Daniel had to walk, and joked that he was calling him Lucky Dave from then on. But the nickname would take on a haunting irony. April 4th and 5th brought David to Idyllwild. He checked into the Idyllwild Inn for 2 nights. He emailed his parents that he'd found the town to be tasty, cheap, and friendly. He bought new things, stocked up on supplies, and rested. But he was also facing a logistical problem. He had been hiking with no phone, no GPS, no personal locator beacon. His only way to communicate was through a Kindle, which could only connect to Wi-Fi, and only when it was charged. And David's charger didn't fit in American outlets. He ordered a new adapter, but it never arrived, so he ordered another one. In what would become his final email, David told his parents that he'd be getting a later start in the morning, waiting for the post office to open so he could get that charger. On April 6th, David signed the trail register outside the Idyllwild Inn. It's a small wooden box with a logbook where hikers record their names, dates, and destinations. It's not official, but it is a trail tradition, and he wrote his name there. He also messaged a friend in Santa Barbara, saying he planned the visit in about 4 weeks. His plan was to hike 470 more miles to Ridgecrest, then take a bus up the coast. On April 7th, 2017, David checked out of his motel. He left Idyllwild, headed north, and from that moment on, David O'Sullivan was never seen again. He was just 2 weeks and 180 miles into his journey of a lifetime. David's trail stopped in Idyllwild. After leaving town on April 7th, he vanished. He never made it to Santa Barbara, where a friend had been expecting him weeks later. He never checked in with his family again. His bank account, which had shown a slow and steady trail of spending, motels, food gear, went silent. Nothing. But no alarm bells went off right away, because David had warned them. Before he left Ireland, he told his parents he might not be in regular contact. The trail was remote. He didn't have a cell phone, and Wi-Fi for his Kindle was hit or miss. He said not to worry if they didn't hear from him for a while. And in the hiking world, a while can mean days, or even weeks. So when a week passed, then 2, then a month, his family waited, worried, but waiting. Meanwhile, his friend in Santa Barbara, who had been expecting a visit sometime in early May, reached out. The message was casual, hopeful. "Hey, when should I expect you to arrive here?" But there was no reply. The next day, he tried again, with a simple hello. Still, nothing. By now, the silence was deafening. David was nearly 2 months overdue. Back in Ireland, his family contacted local police, and they also took to social media, posting messages on Facebook groups dedicated to the Pacific Crest Trail hikers. They asked, "Has anyone seen David O'Sullivan? He was last heard from in Idyllwild. Please, if you saw him, let us know." They reached out to his bank, and they were told that his account was still active. It gave them hope. If his card was being used, maybe he was still out there. Maybe he was just taking longer than they expected. But that hope was a mirage. The activity on David's account wasn't from purchases. It was from scheduled payments, auto debits, subscriptions. In truth, David hadn't made a single transaction since Idyllwild. By the end of June, nearly 3 months after he was last seen, the O'Sullivan family could no longer wait. They returned to the Irish police, but this time they also contacted the Irish consulate in San Francisco. They were desperate for help, but now they were confronting something they'd never imagined: the staggering complexity of reporting a missing person across international borders. Who do you call? What agency has jurisdiction? How do you get a foreign police department to care about someone they've never met? Eventually, an Irish outreach group in San Diego stepped in to help. They made phone calls, pulled strings, and talked to the owner of an Irish pub in Marietta, a small city about 50 miles from Idyllwild. The owner knew a local police officer who was also Irish, Officer Sean Lawler. And it was Officer Lawler who finally cut through the red tape. On July 13th, 2017, more than 3 months after David disappeared, he entered David's information into the state and federal missing persons databases. He also contacted the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, which is the agency responsible for the Idyllwild area. But by then, it would be too late for a rescue. David wasn't missing for a few days. He'd been gone for months. There'd be no helicopters, no massive coordinated search. Instead, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department approached the case from 2 angles. Either David had chosen to disappear, or they were now looking for his remains. His mother said that she had assumed naively that when she reported her son missing, the whole of California would be out there looking for him. But the reality was far more quiet. Almost no one was. Because David hadn't been reported missing in the early, critical hours after he disappeared. There's no urgency, no assumption of danger, no reason legally to initiate a large-scale search. By the time his name hit the database, his trail was cold. Investigators spent the next few months chasing leads. There were a few reported sightings, a few tips, but nothing that panned out. They planned one official search, just one. It was held on August 12, 2017, covering nearly 20 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. The search zone stretched from Fuller Ridge to the desert edge, just north of Interstate 10. Nothing was found. And just 2 months later, in October 2017, the case was quietly closed. In a report dated October 12th, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department wrote, "At this time, there are no additional investigative leads. No additional information has been received that would show David was, in fact, lost or missing along the portions of the PCT within the department's jurisdiction, or prove David was in the Idyllwild area. The case will be closed exceptional until further information is developed. In criminal cases, closed exceptional usually means law enforcement believes they know what happened, but something is preventing them from formally solving the case. Like the suspect might be dead, the victim might not want to press charges, there might be legal roadblocks. But this wasn't a criminal case. And when asked what closed exceptional meant in a missing persons case, the sheriff's department declined to explain. Just north of Riverside County is San Bernardino County, the next jurisdiction on the trail. But San Bernardino officials never searched for David. A spokesperson later said that the only information they had was that David was last seen in Idyllwild, so they assumed he never made it to their region. Then, just days after the case was closed, David's parents arrived in California for the first of 3 trips from Ireland to search for their son. It was a journey they had never imagined making, and there was nothing waiting for them when they arrived. No plan, no search, no help, and certainly not their son. Later, they were told, gently but firmly, that it could take years or even never to find David's remains. Their second visit came in December, hoping that time and visibility might have changed things. But the reception was cold. Only one detective would agree to meet with them. They said they felt encouraged to leave, as if continuing to look for David was a burden on the system. They were told that nothing more could be done. The only reassurance they got? That if a search and rescue team happened to be out training in the area, they would keep David in mind. But when the search went quiet, one small light came out of the darkness surrounding David's disappearance, and that was the formation of a foundation. One born not only of loss, but of love and determination. The Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation, or FOF, was created in honor of David O'Sullivan and Chris Fowler, another young man who vanished while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. The foundation emerged out of a need that became painfully clear. When hikers go missing, their families are too often left to navigate a confusing, fragmented system alone. At the center of this foundation is Kathy Tarr. Kathy had planned to hike the PCT herself in 2016, but a serious car accident forced her off the trail. Still tethered to the hiking community and determined to help whoever she could, she began volunteering in the search for Chris Fowler in August 2017. And while helping out in that case, Kathy came across a flyer for David, just like I did. She hadn't known him, but something about his story and the grief she saw etched into the words on that flyer stopped her in her tracks. At that moment, she felt a shift. Her mission had just doubled. In November 2017, Kathy met Con and Carmel O'Sullivan, who had just arrived from Ireland to try and find their son. They were navigating unfamiliar legal systems, jurisdictional confusion, and what must have felt like impossible odds. Kathy stepped in as an advocate, guiding them, standing beside them, and refusing to let their son's case disappear quietly. From her work with both families, Kathy saw the cracks in the system. She saw the void of resources, the lack of coordinated search support, and the emotional toll on families left to do the work that authorities had already set aside. And so, she created the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation, with the goal of ensuring that no family would ever feel as lost or unsupported as the Fowlers and O'Sullivans had. The Foundation's mission is both compassionate and strategic, to assist families of missing hikers, connect them with vetted resources, organize private research efforts after official ones have ended, and advocate for prevention and safety in outdoor exploration. But Kathy didn't do this alone. As David's case grew quieter in the media, a group of volunteers from across the United States, none of whom had ever met him, began following his story. They were moved by his family's quiet heartbreak, by the haunting gaps in the official timeline, and by the sense that someone needed to keep searching. These volunteers teamed up with the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation, bringing them a wide range of skills: mapping, navigation, search and rescue experience, and the meticulous attention to detail that only comes from a deep personal drive. They used topographic maps, GPS overlays, weather records, and trail logs. They studied photographs and pored over terrain reports, crafting theories about what might have happened. Many came to believe that David hadn't made it far past Idyllwild, that he may have taken an alternate route to avoid snow or injury and become lost in the steep, unforgiving wilderness that surrounds the area. So they kept searching. Then, in 2020, the COVID pandemic put everything on pause. Travel restrictions, public land closures, and safety protocols brought their efforts to a frustrating standstill. When they were finally able to return to the field, their dedication led to remarkable discoveries. While they didn't find David, they did find the remains of 2 other missing hikers in the region. People who, like David, had once stepped into the wilderness and vanished, leaving only silence behind. Those discoveries brought closure to 2 other grieving families, and they proved something that Kathy and the FOF volunteers already knew. There's value in persistence and power in people coming together, not for reward or recognition, but simply because someone needs to care. David's story didn't just spark a foundation. It created a movement, a network of people who refused to let the lost be forgotten. And though the questions surrounding his disappearance still remain, his name has become a symbol of action, advocacy, and the unwavering human need to find one another. David O'Sullivan's case remains officially unsolved, but unofficially, his story has never been forgotten. It's been years since David O'Sullivan was last seen walking out of Idyllwild, California, with a pack on his back and a dream in his heart. And yet, here we are, still without answers. We don't know what happened to David. The absence of evidence, no remains, no belongings, no confirmed sightings, has left a space filled with uncertainty, with theories, and what-ifs. Some of those theories are rooted in logic. Others are whispers that come late at night, when the silence stretches too long and the grief demands an explanation. There are several possibilities. Most people, especially those who've studied his case closely, believe David never made it out of the San Jacinto Mountains, just north of Idyllwild. That's where the Pacific Crest Trail cuts through steep, icy ridges and forested wilderness. And it's where many believe David met with some kind of tragic accident. The stretch that searchers focus on the most is Fuller Ridge, a 5-mile section of the trail that's notorious among PCT hikers. It's a place that even experienced hikers approach with caution, especially in the early spring when snow and ice still cling to the trail. In April 2017, when David would have been making his way north, Fuller Ridge was still buried under several feet of snow. And David wasn't prepared for that. He had no prior experience hiking in snow. He didn't have microspikes or crampons, no ice axe, no GPS beacon, no cell phone, just a Kindle that connected over Wi-Fi. He was relying on paper maps. And according to multiple sources, he hadn't trained for winter conditions. He was enthusiastic and determined, but dangerously under-equipped. And that's what haunts people. Multiple hikers that same season, many of them far more experienced than David, reported slipping, sliding, and getting lost along Fuller Ridge. Some were injured and had to be rescued. It's not hard to imagine that David might have lost his footing on an icy slope, or taken a wrong turn in the snow, or simply gotten exhausted and lost in the high-altitude wilderness. And then there's another detail, easy to miss, but possibly important. The morning David left Idyllwild, he had to wait for the post office to open so he could pick up the outlet adapter to charge his Kindle. That delay meant he got a late start. Most of the other hikers who had stayed in Idyllwild had already headed out. So if David ran into trouble, if he got hurt or lost or stranded, it's possible no one was coming up behind him. He would have been completely alone out there. That's a painful image, but it's one that drives the searchers. Searching the San Jacintos isn't easy. The terrain is brutal. Once you're off the main trail, it becomes almost immediately inaccessible. Slopes are steep, tree cover is dense, and the ground is broken up by ravines, boulders, and fast-moving streams. In an ideal world, searchers could use drones to scan the terrain, but that's not so simple. The area where they believe David might be is designated as state wilderness, where drones are prohibited. Federal law says that even if they got permission, drone operators must keep the aircraft in their line of sight, something that's basically impossible in dense forest and steep terrain. Even if they could fly drones there, the canopy and rock formations can still hide things from view. There's also the possibility that David made it out of the San Jacintos and something happened further along the trail. It's been suggested that maybe he made it to another region, one that wasn't searched because everyone assumed he was still near Idyllwild. If he crossed into a different county, like San Bernardino, search efforts wouldn't have followed him, because his last confirmed location was still in Riverside County. That kind of jurisdictional boundary can become an invisible wall in missing person investigations. So it's possible, though less likely, that David traveled further north, past where anyone thought to look. But there's one important detail that casts doubt on that theory. Because the next major stop on the trail is Big Bear, about 5 days hiking from Idyllwild, and there's no record of David ever arriving. He didn't pick up a resupply there. His bank account remained untouched. His Kindle was never turned on again after April 5th. He had several $1,000s in his account, money he would have needed for food and gear, but none of it was ever spent. And to most people following the case, this is key. He simply couldn't have made it to Big Bear or beyond without resupplying. And if he never resupplied, it's likely he didn't make it that far. And then there are darker theories. California's national forests, especially the more remote sections, have long been known to host illegal marijuana grow operations. These aren't the regulated dispensaries you see in cities. These are clandestine grows, often hidden deep in the backcountry, protected by people who do not want to be found. It's a grim possibility, but one that can't be ignored. What if David accidentally wandered into one of these areas? What if he was met with violence? Or what if, after a natural or accidental death, someone else found his body, someone involved in illicit activity who didn't report it for fear of drawing attention? We don't know, and we may never know. There's also the theory, always uncomfortable to voice, that David might have chosen to disappear, that he walked away from his life on purpose. But those who knew him, especially his parents, don't believe that for a second. His mother, Carmel, has said he would never be that cruel. She believes deeply and unequivocally that David did not choose to vanish, that he would never put them through this kind of grief. Everything about his messages from the trail backs that up. He was excited. He was proud of himself. He was doing something he had dreamed about. It wasn't easy, but he was up for the challenge. And he was someone who loved his family. He would have told them if he needed to walk away. So that leaves us with the most likely, but still heartbreaking theory, that David died in the wilderness, alone, lost, hurt, unable to call for help. And if that's the case, then the forces of nature, the rain, the snow, the wind, the sun, the gravity, wildlife, have had years to conceal what's left. Every passing season makes it harder. Bones bleach, gear breaks down, evidence disappears. But people are still looking. Not because they expect a miracle, but because they believe David deserves to be found, that his parents deserve answers, that this story deserves an ending. And that maybe, one day, someone will come across a sign, a clue, something that will finally bring David home. The Pacific Crest Trail is more than just a hike. It's a pilgrimage, a personal Everest, a stretch of raw wilderness that winds its way from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, and Washington. Every year, thousands of hikers set out to walk it. Some chasing adventure, others healing, searching, or proving something to themselves. And for many, it becomes the experience of a lifetime. But it's not just beauty and transformation out there. It's also the isolation, exposure, risk. Because the PCT, for all its magic, can be deadly. Since the trail was officially designated in the 1990s, people have gone missing. People have died. And for every hiker who summits the final border monument at Manning Park, there are others whose journeys ended in heartbreak, sometimes by choice, sometimes without a trace. So if you're thinking of hiking the PCT, or if someone you love is lacing up their boots, it's worth taking just a moment to talk about how to stay safe. Not just to make it through, but to make it home. Now let's start with the terrain. One of the biggest dangers on the PCT is underestimating the sheer variety and unpredictability of the landscape. This isn't a trail that gradually changes with seasons. In a matter of hours, you can go from desert heat to snowy alpine passes, from sunny canyon trails to sudden sleet or high winds on exposed ridgelines. Take Southern California, for example. Most people think of it as warm and dry, but above the desert, the mountains can still hold deep snow well into April. And that's where David was last seen. He left Idyllwild, headed north toward Fuller Ridge, the stretch of trail that experienced PCT hikers talk about with a kind of reverent caution. David didn't have snow experience. He didn't have the right gear. He told people he was headed north, but no one knows which route he actually took or how far he got. And he never made it to the next trail town. And that's the thing about wilderness. When something goes wrong, you don't always get a second chance. So what can you do? First and foremost, you need to respect the trail. This means not just being in good physical shape, but understanding the specific risks of each section. If you're going through snow, don't rely on luck. Train ahead of time. Learn how to use crampons or micro spikes. Practice using an ice axe before you need it. Know how to recognize avalanche-prone slopes and cornices. The snow doesn't care how excited you are to be out there. It doesn't care that you made it all the way from Campo. And don't assume that your phone will save you. The PCT crosses vast areas with no cell service, especially in steep mountain terrain. If you don't have a working satellite GPS or beacon and something goes wrong, you may not be able to call for help. Devices like the Garmin InReach or the Spot Tracker are expensive, yes, but they've saved lives. And many of the missing hiker cases, people wonder, what if they'd had one? Even experienced hikers have found themselves in trouble. Trevor Lair died in 2020 after falling near the same area where David vanished. Chris Fowler, trail named Sherpa, disappeared in Washington. He had thousands of miles under his belt, but the trail still took him. The other thing that makes searches so difficult is just how quickly someone can vanish. If you're hiking alone and something happens, if you fall, get injured, disoriented, there may be no one behind you. In David's case, he left Idyllwild later in the morning, after waiting for the post office to open. That likely put him behind the pack. And if he fell or got lost, it's possible no one came along after him that day. No one to help, no one to sound the alarm. That's why it's so important to leave a plan with someone back home. Not just, I'll check in when I can, but a clear schedule. When you're starting, where you plan to sleep each night, when you expect to check in. And if you miss that window, they'll know when to worry and when to call for help. And when you're planning your gear, plan for extremes. Pack for cold, even if you're starting in the desert. Bring gloves, hats, and layers. Carry enough food and always more water than you think you'll need. Learn how to purify water safely, because not every stream is safe to drink from, and dehydration can sneak up fast. River crossings are another serious hazard, especially in the Sierra during a heavy snowmelt year. Rushing water looks manageable until you're waist deep in it and your footing slips. Every year, hikers drown. Others have lost gear or barely made it out. And then there are the less obvious dangers: heat stroke, hypothermia, altitude sickness, wild animals, or even just a twisted ankle on a remote trail. If you're on a ridge with no one around and you go down, it could be hours or even days before anyone finds you, if they do at all. Some hikers also raise concerns about the risk of crossing paths with illegal activity. In parts of California, the national forest land has been used for illegal marijuana grows. These are rare encounters, but they can be dangerous. If you're off trail and stumble into one of these sites, it can put you at real risk. That's why searchers looking for David O'Sullivan have sometimes worried, not just that he got lost, but that someone else found him first. And if they had something to hide, they would have made sure he was never found. These are dark possibilities and thankfully rare, but they're part of the bigger picture, that the wilderness doesn't just test your body, it tests your judgment. It asks for humility, it rewards preparation, and it punishes overconfidence. And finally, know your limits. You don't have to hike every mile. You can skip snow sections. You can rest. You can get off the trail if you're feeling unsafe. There's no shame in turning back. The trail will still be there, but you need to be too. When hikers like David O'Sullivan or Chris Fowler go missing, it sends ripples through the hiking community. People gather, volunteer, search, map trails, analyze weather, study terrain and GPS data. They look for any clue. And in some cases, volunteer searchers find the remains of other missing hikers, people who had been out there for years. But David is still missing. And every year that goes by, the task of finding him becomes more difficult. The sun and snow and rain and time erase the traces of a life lived and lost out there. So if you're heading into the PCT, carry him with you. Carry Chris and Trevor and the others. Hike smart, stay safe, and never forget that every step you take is in a place that demands your respect. For David O'Sullivan's family, the worst part is not knowing. It's not knowing where he is or what happened after he walked out of that post office in Idyllwild. It's the empty space where answers should be. The absence of a goodbye, the silence that stretches on year after year. His mother once said, the passage of time, in one way, it does ease the pain, but in another, I don't think it ever will. Grief, when it's open-ended like this, becomes something else entirely. It's not something you move on from. It's something you carry. David was just 25 when he vanished. He's white with an Irish accent, 5 feet 10 inches tall, about 154 pounds, with blue eyes and black hair. He was last known to be carrying a blue backpack and purple water bottle. His family continues to search, not just for closure, but for the truth. If you're hiking in or around Idyllwild or the surrounding areas of the San Jacinto Mountains and you come across something, a piece of gear, a scrap of clothing, anything that seems out of place, they ask that you please do not move it. Instead, take a photo, mark the location if you can, and email the details to helpfinddavido@gmail.com. You can also contact Captain Leonard Purvis at the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, Hemet Station, at 951-791-3400. And if this story moved you, if you want to be part of the effort to help families like the O'Sullivans, you can support the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation in their continued search for missing hikers and advocating for those left behind. Whether it's by donating, volunteering, or simply spreading awareness, you can make a difference. Visit fofound.org/join-our-team to learn how you can help. Because David's story is not over, and there is still hope that one day he can be brought home. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod, and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/thelasttrippodcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.